The grocery store was buzzing with the ordinary hum of life. A conveyor belt rattled softly as items slid forward, one after another, the scanner releasing its sharp beep, beep, beep into the air. The sound was mechanical, impersonal, yet to Marissa Carter it struck like a judge's gavel with each pass. Every beep felt like it announced her private struggle to the world. Beside her, Eli, her 7-year-old son, clutched a box of cereal against his chest as if it were treasure. His small voice, sweet but uncertain, whispered, "Mommy, can we still get this one?" His words tugged at her heart in ways the fluorescent lights above never could. Marissa forced a smile, though her throat was tight. She glanced at the items already stacked on the counter: milk, bread, a few apples, eggs, essentials. Bare bones. She had already removed the pasta she wanted, the juice Eli loved, even a small jar of coffee she had promised herself as a rare comfort. Her cart looked half empty, stripped down not by choice but by necessity. Her hand brushed the card in her pocket, her lifeline and her curse. She knew what would happen. The numbers in her mind didn't lie. But she prayed, quietly, desperately, that maybe the bank's delay would buy her mercy today. The cashier, a young woman trying to hide her boredom, announced the total. The amount landed heavy in Marissa's ears, louder than it was, heavier than it should have been. She swallowed hard and slid her card into the reader. Her heart thudded like a drum. She kept her eyes fixed on Eli's hopeful face, pretending everything was fine. Processing. The screen blinked. For a second, time seemed to hold its breath. Then, cruelly, the word appeared: declined. The cashier's voice softened, as if pity could erase the sting. "Ma'am, it didn't go through. Would you like to remove something?" The hum of the store carried on. A cart squeaked in the next aisle. A baby cried somewhere in the distance. Yet for Marissa, the world shrank to the 2 words flashing in red: declined, remove. Eli's fingers curled tighter around the cereal box. "It's okay, Mommy," he whispered, trying to be brave for her, though his eyes betrayed his disappointment. Marissa's chest ached. She forced her voice steady. "Yes, let's remove a few things." Her eyes scanned the groceries, calculating which sacrifice hurt least, knowing that each one chipped away at her dignity. The milk for Eli had to stay. The bread, too. But what about the fruit? Could she let that go? Could she tell herself he didn't need fresh apples this week? Her hands trembled as she pushed the items back. The scanner stayed silent now, waiting, while Marissa felt every gaze around her pressing down, imagined or real. It didn't matter. In that moment, shame burned hotter than hunger. "Keep everything. Your bills are mine now." The voice cut through the silence, steady yet gentle, carrying a kind of authority that turned heads instantly. Marissa froze, her hand still hovering over the apples she was about to surrender. She turned, expecting to see a stranger offering pity with a smug smile. Instead, her eyes landed on a man dressed simply: jeans, a clean shirt, no entourage, no outward display of wealth. His expression wasn't condescending, it was calm, as if kindness had always been his first instinct. The words lingered in the air, wrapping themselves around Marissa's racing heartbeat. Eli blinked up at him, wide-eyed, clutching the cereal box tighter as if it were proof that miracles existed. Viewers, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in Marissa's shoes? Standing at a checkout line with your chest tight, silently praying that your card wouldn't betray you? Have you ever chosen between your own needs and someone you love, sacrificing without a second thought? If you have, then you know the heaviness of that moment, the way it digs into your pride, the way it whispers you're failing. But here's the truth, Marissa wasn't failing. She was doing what millions of parents do every day, fighting invisible battles, making impossible choices, and carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders without letting it crush her child's smile. That grocery store wasn't just about milk and bread. It was about dignity, survival, and the hope that tomorrow would be kinder. And yet, fate stepped in. A stranger, no, not just a stranger, but a man whose life could not be more different from hers, chose that moment to speak 6 words that would change everything, keep everything. Your bills are mine now. What would you do if someone said that to you? Would you accept it gratefully? Would you resist out of pride? Or would you, like Marissa, feel torn between desperation and dignity? How many of us walk through life carrying battles no one else sees? On the surface, we smile, we nod, we keep moving forward pretending everything is fine. But behind closed doors, the truth tells a different story. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, late-night tears we never let anyone witness. Silent prayers whispered into the dark, hoping tomorrow will bring a break. Marissa's struggle in that grocery store wasn't unique, yet it felt isolating. That's the cruel paradox of hardship. Millions of people endure it, but when it's your turn, you feel like you're the only one. Every swipe of her declined card screamed failure to her, though in reality it screamed courage, because only someone brave chooses to keep trying, even when the odds are stacked against them. Think about it. How many parents sacrifice their own dreams just so their children can have a shot at theirs? How many mothers and fathers pretend to be full at dinner so their kids can eat more? How many people wear a steady smile in public while fighting storms in private? Marissa was one of them. She wasn't weak. She was strong in the quietest, fiercest way possible. She didn't cry out for help, though her heart longed for relief. She didn't collapse under the weight, though her back was tired of bending. She simply smiled at Eli, assuring him with her eyes that everything was okay, even when it wasn't. That's the beauty and tragedy of hidden battles. They make us heroes, but they also make us invisible. Society rarely applauds the single parent in the checkout line, the janitor sweeping after midnight, the student working 3 jobs to pay for school. And yet, their stories carry more power than headlines about the wealthy and famous. So when Nate Harrington spoke those words, "Keep everything, your bills are mine now," he didn't just pay for groceries. He acknowledged a struggle most people overlook. He pulled back the curtain on an invisible fight, shining a light where darkness had been. And in that moment, something shifted. For Marissa, for Eli, and perhaps even for Nate himself. Before we move deeper into this story, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If you've ever believed, even just for a moment, that kindness has the power to change a life, then this is the kind of story you'll want to hear through to the end. Because what happened in that grocery store was only the beginning. Marissa Carter thought she was walking away with groceries, but in reality, she was stepping into a chapter of her life that would rewrite everything she believed about struggle, dignity, and love. And here's where you come in. The more people who hear stories like this, the more we spread hope, compassion, and encouragement in a world that desperately needs it. So if you're new here, welcome. And if you've been with us before, thank you for returning. Go ahead and hit the like button right now. It tells the platform that this story matters. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss the next tale we share here on Tales by Williams. All right, let's return to the checkout line. The beeps of the scanner may have quieted, but the echo of those 6 words, "Keep everything, your bills are mine now," was only just beginning to ripple through 3 lives that would never be the same again. The world didn't make things easy for Marissa Carter. By the time she turned 31, she had already learned what it meant to live with constant weight pressing down on her shoulders. Each day was measured not by what she gained, but by what she managed to hold together. Her mornings began long before the sun rose. While most of the city was still tucked in bed, she was already slipping into her work uniform, the faint smell of detergent clinging to the faded fabric. She worked the morning shift at a neighborhood cafe, where the clinking of coffee cups and the steady hiss of the espresso machine were her soundtrack. Smiling at customers was part of the job, but often her smiles hid the exhaustion that sat heavy in her bones. When the cafe closed at noon, she didn't go home to rest. She crossed town to her second job, helping in a small accounting office. It wasn't glamorous, sorting receipts, filing papers, answering phones, but it paid just enough to cover rent for the tiny two-bedroom apartment she shared with her son, Eli. Still, the bills always seemed to outnumber the paychecks: electricity, rent, groceries, school supplies. Each envelope that arrived in the mail carried a sense of urgency, some marked in red, others threatening late fees. She stacked them neatly on the kitchen table, promising herself she'd figure out a way, even if the math never added up. At night, though, her world changed. When the shifts were done and the noise of the day quieted, Marissa became just Mom. She'd sit on Eli's bed, his small form wrapped in dinosaur-patterned sheets, and read to him by the soft glow of a lamp. His favorite story was about a brave little bird who flew across oceans, refusing to give up even when storms tried to push it back. Eli would giggle at the bird's adventures, his eyelids growing heavy, his hand holding hers until sleep carried him away. In those moments, the unpaid bills on the table didn't matter. The hunger she sometimes carried to make sure Eli had enough food didn't matter. What mattered was the sound of his laughter, the warmth of his tiny hand, and the unshakable truth that, no matter how hard the world pressed down, she would never let go of him. Yet when the apartment grew quiet and Eli's steady breathing filled the night, the doubts returned. She'd stare at the ceiling, her heart whispering questions she could never answer. Am I doing enough? Will he grow up wishing for a life I can't give him? How long can I keep this up before something breaks? Those fears were her constant companions, silent but unrelenting, and every morning before the sun rose again she carried them with her into another day of sacrifice. Marissa often found herself staring at Eli when he wasn't looking. He would be at the kitchen table, coloring with broken crayons or building towers from mismatched toy blocks, and she'd feel both pride and guilt in the same breath. Pride, because his joy seemed endless even when he had so little. Guilt, because she feared that joy was built on fragile ground. Am I giving him enough? She would wonder. Not just food or clothes, but the kind of childhood he deserves? The world outside their apartment walls carried so many things she couldn't afford. School trips, brand new sneakers, a bedroom filled with toys. Sometimes she worried Eli would one day notice what other kids had and what he didn't. She feared the day his innocent questions would turn into resentful ones. At night, when bills glared back at her from the table, Marissa would play out imaginary futures in her mind. Some were filled with hope. Eli graduating from college, standing tall, his eyes bright with gratitude. Others, darker ones, haunted her. Eli looking at her with disappointment, asking why she hadn't been able to do more. Her greatest terror wasn't poverty itself. It was the idea of Eli growing up believing he was less because of what she couldn't give him. That thought pierced deeper than hunger or fatigue ever could. Yet even as doubts circled her heart, she forced herself to keep going. Every smile she wore for Eli was stitched together with threads of determination. Every bedtime story, every warm meal on the table was her way of telling him, I may not be able to give you everything, but I will give you all of me. Still, the questions never left her mind. On her way to work, she'd glance at other families, parents dropping kids off at school in shiny cars, mothers with arms full of shopping bags. A quiet voice inside her whispered, will Eli ever look at me and wish for a different kind of mom? The thought haunted her most during those quiet, in-between hours, the moments after Eli drifted off to sleep and before exhaustion claimed her. She would sit by the window, the city lights blinking faintly in the distance, and ask herself a question she couldn't bear to say aloud. What if love isn't enough? The grocery store on that Friday evening was crowded, carts rattling across the tiles, announcements echoing faintly from the ceiling speakers. Marissa pushed her cart carefully, Eli perched on the edge with his legs dangling. She had already rehearsed the shopping trip in her mind before they arrived. Running numbers, trimming the list until only the most necessary items remained. Her cart held little more than the basics: milk, bread, a dozen eggs, apples, cereal for Eli, rice, and a small pack of chicken she hoped to stretch into 2 or 3 meals. Still, even as she pushed the cart toward the register, she knew she was dancing on a fragile line. One wrong calculation, and the total would tip beyond her reach. Eli reached out as they passed the juice aisle. "Mommy, can we get orange juice this time? Just a small one?" His eyes lit up with hope. Marissa's throat tightened. She hesitated, then lifted a small carton from the shelf and placed it in the cart. "Okay," she said softly, "but just this one." The smile that spread across Eli's face was worth the risk, at least for a moment. When they reached the register, the conveyor belt swallowed the items one by one, the scanner's steady beep puncturing Marissa's nerves. She stacked the groceries neatly, almost as though order could somehow reduce the total. "Your total is—" The cashier read out the amount, and Marissa felt her heart dip. Too high. Her hands went instantly to her pocket, pulling out the worn debit card. She slid it into the machine, avoiding eye contact, silently begging. Declined. Her cheeks burned. Eli glanced at her, sensing the shift. The cashier offered a polite smile, her voice gentle. "Would you like to take something off?" Marissa nodded quickly, her mind racing. What could she let go of without breaking Eli's heart? She pulled the chicken first, sliding it back with trembling hands. Then she hesitated over the apples. Eli loved apples. She thought of his small hands reaching into his lunchbox at school. She swallowed and shook her head, forcing the apples to stay. Next went the juice. Eli's smile from earlier replayed in her mind, but she couldn't risk it. She placed the carton aside, her chest tightening as if she'd broken a promise. The scanner beeped again as the cashier re-entered the items. The new total dropped slightly, but Marissa knew it might still not be enough. She reached for the cereal box in Eli's hands. "Maybe not this time, sweetheart." Eli clutched it tighter, his voice trembling. "But Mommy—" The look in his eyes nearly shattered her. He didn't cry, didn't argue, but the quiet disappointment cut deeper than words. She forced a smile, stroking his hair. "Next time, okay? I promise." The box joined the juice on the side counter, each removal feeling like a piece of her dignity stripped away in front of strangers. She swiped her card again, praying that this time it would go through. To the people standing in line behind her, Marissa was just another customer taking too long at the register. They didn't know her story. They didn't see the hours she worked, the meals she skipped, the nights she spent calculating how to stretch a single paycheck. All they saw was a woman putting items back. But that's the truth about sacrifice. It rarely looks grand. Most of the time it's small, quiet, almost invisible. It's the mother who pretends she isn't hungry so her child can have a full plate. It's the father who walks to work in the rain so his kids can ride the bus. It's the single parent who chooses fruit over coffee, shoes for their child instead of a winter coat for themselves. Marissa didn't think of herself as heroic. She only thought of herself as a mother doing what had to be done. Yet in reality, every choice she made, every item she set aside, every comfort she denied herself, was an act of love. Not loud, not celebrated, but powerful in its own way. The world often applauds big gestures, but overlooks the daily sacrifices that keep families afloat. Nobody will ever hand out awards for mother who put back the juice carton. No headlines will honor the woman who worked 2 jobs and still read bedtime stories. But those are the acts that shape a child's heart, teaching them resilience, compassion, and the meaning of love. As Marissa slid her card once more, hope flickering inside her chest, she carried herself with quiet strength. Even if the transaction went through, she knew the weight would return tomorrow. Another shift, another set of bills, another round of difficult choices. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty: Eli would never feel unloved. He might grow up with less than others, but he would grow up knowing his mother gave him everything she had. That truth alone made every sacrifice worth it. And though no one else in the store saw it, in that moment, Marissa embodied a rare kind of courage. The kind that doesn't shout but endures. The kind that doesn't ask for recognition but keeps moving forward. The kind of quiet heroism that holds the world together in ways most people never notice. Across town, while Marissa wrestled with her daily battles, Nathaniel Nate Harrington lived in a world that many envied but few understood. His name was printed in glossy magazines, spoken in business circles with admiration, and linked to wealth that seemed limitless. He was the man behind towering office buildings, luxury developments, and countless investments that only grew with time. Yet when night fell and he returned to his penthouse, the applause faded. The sprawling apartment stretched wide and silent, walls of glass framing the city's skyline. To outsiders, it was breathtaking. To Nate, it was hollow. Dinner was prepared by staff who left as soon as their work was done. Plates of gourmet food sat untouched, more often than not, their flavors lost in the absence of company. Nate would sit at a long dining table meant for 10, yet he ate alone, his chair the only one ever pulled out. The clinking of silverware against porcelain echoed too loudly in the silence, reminding him of what his money could never buy, someone who cared about him, not his fortune. Sometimes, as he glanced at his reflection in the window, he barely recognized himself. He saw a man who had everything, except the one thing he longed for: connection. Friends admired his success, employees respected his authority, business partners praised his vision, but none of them stayed after the deals were signed. None of them asked how he was, not Nathaniel the CEO, but Nate the man. In his younger years, he told himself it didn't matter. He had goals, drive, ambition. He built an empire from the ground up, proving everyone who doubted him wrong. But now, in his late 30s, the trophies felt cold. The penthouse, with its spotless floors and flawless design, was less a home than a monument to loneliness. Every night he told himself the same thing: tomorrow will be different. Yet every tomorrow looked exactly the same. That Friday evening, when he decided to skip the chauffeur and drive himself to the local grocery store, it wasn't for the food. It was for something ordinary. He craved the hum of normal life, the feeling of walking unnoticed among strangers. No board meetings, no reporters, no carefully curated events. Just the simple act of picking up groceries like everyone else. It was in that search for normalcy that his path crossed with Marissa Carter's. The grocery store smelled faintly of bread and citrus, its aisles busy with families moving through their routines. For most, it was just another errand. For Nate Harrington, it was something rarer, a chance to walk quietly among people who didn't know his name, who didn't care about balance sheets or quarterly reports. He chose a simple basket instead of a cart, filling it with a few basics: bread, coffee, pasta. Nothing extravagant. He liked the way it grounded him. He could almost pretend he was just another man shopping after work, not the billionaire whose every move made headlines. As he rounded the corner toward the checkout lanes, a scene caught his attention. A woman, thin shoulders tense beneath a worn sweater, was unloading groceries onto the conveyor belt. Her son stood beside her, clutching a box of cereal with both arms, his eyes bright with the innocence only children carry. Nate might have passed by without much thought, but then he noticed the way her hand hesitated with each item, almost reluctant to let it go. He saw the way she counted silently in her head, lips pressed tight as if every number hurt. When the cashier announced the total, Nate didn't need to see the screen to know it was too much. He recognized the flicker of panic in her eyes, the way her chest rose and fell quickly as she slid her card into the reader. He knew that look because he had seen it before, years ago, in his own home. His mother's face came rushing back to him. She had stood in checkout lines just like this, when Nate was no older than the boy now clutching the cereal box. He remembered the shame that settled over her whenever the cashier said the card wouldn't work. He remembered the way she always whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart," though he knew it wasn't. Nate's chest tightened. Despite the decades and the billions, the memory was sharp, unsoftened by time. He could still feel the sting of being the boy who watched his mother put food back, pretending it didn't matter. That boy had promised himself one thing. If he ever reached a place of abundance, he would never turn his back on someone enduring the struggles he knew too well. And now, in this ordinary grocery store, he saw a reflection of his past standing before him. Marissa Carter's card declined. Her voice was steady as she asked the cashier to remove items, but Nate heard the strain beneath it. He saw her son's face fall as the juice was set aside, the cereal pulled from his hands. And in that instant, Nate knew he couldn't stay silent. The conveyor belt had grown still. The cashier waited patiently, items set aside to the left, her hand hovering over the keys. Marissa forced herself to breathe as she glanced at her son. Eli tried to be brave, but his small shoulders slumped when the cereal box disappeared behind the counter. Marissa reached for the apples next. Her hand trembled. If she gave those up, she could shave a little more off the total. Her son loved them, though. He'd eat one every morning if she could afford it. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the smooth skin of the fruit. Behind her, Nate's grip tightened on his basket. He had walked through boardrooms where millions were at stake without blinking. But here, watching a mother decide between apples and dignity, his heart raced with urgency he hadn't felt in years. Marissa opened her mouth to speak, ready to tell the cashier to remove the apples, when another voice, calm, low, certain, interrupted. "Keep everything." The words startled her. She froze, turning slowly, eyes widening as she saw the man behind her. His expression wasn't mocking or smug. It was steady, kind. He spoke again, his tone firm but gentle. "Your bills are mine now." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Eli blinked, his mouth parting in surprise. The cashier looked between them, uncertain. Marissa's breath caught in her throat, disbelief flashing across her face. She searched the man's eyes, expecting judgment or pity, but found none. His gaze held something else entirely, understanding. Not the shallow sympathy of someone who'd never known hardship, but the recognition of someone who had once stood where she stood. I can't accept that," Marissa stammered, her pride colliding with her desperation. Nate leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but unwavering. "Sometimes we all need someone to stand beside us. Let me do this. You don't owe me a thing." His words weren't loud, but they carried through the air like a stone breaking the surface of still water. The silence around them shifted. People in line glanced curiously, some with surprise, others with softened expressions. Eli looked up at his mother, his eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy, can we keep the cereal?" The question, innocent and pure, pierced through the weight of the moment. Marissa's throat tightened. She blinked back, the sting in her eyes, torn between pride and relief. Nate gave the cashier a small nod, the kind that left no room for argument. "Run it again," he said, "all of it." The beeps of the scanner resumed, but this time they didn't sound like judgment. They sounded like grace. The groceries were bagged one by one, the cashier moving quickly now, relieved that the awkward moment had passed. Eli hugged the cereal box against his chest, a grin spreading across his face as if he'd just been given a treasure. Marissa stood still for a moment, caught between gratitude and hesitation. Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Deep down, she knew this man wasn't asking for thanks or repayment. He had stepped in not to embarrass her, but to lift her from a moment she had carried far too many times before. As the bags filled, Nate simply waited. He didn't hover, didn't push, didn't make a show of his kindness. His calm presence said more than any speech could. Now let me ask you, dear listener, if you were Marissa standing there with your child and a stranger covered your bill, what would you do? Would you let gratitude soften your pride, or would you struggle to accept help even when you needed it most? And if you were Nate, would you have stepped forward, or would you have looked away, convincing yourself it wasn't your place? These moments define us more than we realize. Sometimes the smallest choices, stepping in, speaking up, reaching out, carry the power to change someone's entire world. If you believe kindness matters, if you believe compassion is what makes us human, then I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Marissa's place? And while you're here, Don, don't forget to tap the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. Trust me, what unfolds from this single act of generosity will surprise you. Because this was no ordinary trip to the grocery store. This was the beginning of a connection neither Marissa nor Nate could have predicted, a connection born not from wealth, but from empathy. Marissa's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse as she stood frozen at the register. The bags of groceries were ready. Eli held onto his cereal with a smile he hadn't worn all week, and yet her chest felt heavier than before. She turned toward Nate, her voice low, almost trembling. "I can't let you do this. It isn't right." Her words weren't sharp, but they carried the weight of a woman who had lived too long refusing handouts. She wasn't ungrateful, far from it. The kindness in Nate's gesture had nearly undone her, but pride and survival are strange companions, and both demanded she resist. Nate didn't flinch. He didn't press. He only met her eyes and gave the faintest nod, as though he understood the storm brewing inside her. "You don't have to explain yourself," he said softly. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I just wanted to help." Marissa's jaw tightened. Her mind pulled in two directions at once. One side screamed that she needed this, that Eli needed this. The other whispered that accepting a stranger's generosity made her weak, dependent, somehow less of the mother she wanted to be. What will Eli think if I let this man pay? She wondered. Will he see me as someone who couldn't provide for him on her own? Will he remember this day not for the groceries, but for the moment his mother couldn't stand on her own 2 feet? Her heart hammered. Pride told her to push the bags back, to walk out with nothing if it meant leaving with dignity. But then her gaze fell to Eli, who clutched the cereal box as if it were a treasure chest. His smile was shy but bright, his small voice whispering, "Thank you, Mommy." The words shattered her defenses. In that instant she realized the truth she'd tried so hard to ignore. Dignity mattered, but her son's happiness mattered more. She turned back to Nate, still torn, her lips pressed thin. "I don't know why you do this for us," she admitted, her tone almost accusing, as though searching for a hidden motive. His expression stayed steady, calm. "Because I've seen this before," he said, "and I know how much it hurts." The honesty in his voice left her without words. Pride still tugged at her, but desperation and gratitude tugged harder. Nate didn't step closer or make a grand gesture. Instead, he shifted the basket in his hand and spoke in the same tone one might use with an old friend. Calm, steady, honest. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "And you don't owe me anything. I just remember what it's like." Marissa studied him carefully. His clothes were simple, yet there was something about the way he carried himself, assured but not imposing, that told her he wasn't like most men she'd met. Still, her instinct was to push back. "You don't even know me. Why would you care?" "Because someone once cared for me," Nate replied. His gaze lowered for a brief second, as though revisiting a memory. "When I was a boy, my mother struggled like you. I can still hear the sound of her voice when she told the cashier to put things back. She'd always tell me it was fine, that we'd get by, but I knew how much it cost her inside." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't wrapped in pity or self-importance. They were plain, almost quiet, but they landed heavily in Marissa's chest. She saw no arrogance in his expression, no hunger for recognition. Just the honesty of someone who carried his own scars. "I can't erase those moments for her," Nate continued. "But if I can spare someone else from living them, even once, then I want to try." Marissa's throat tightened. His words disarmed her more than the money did. They weren't the polished lines of a man used to control. They were raw, personal. She felt the resistance inside her bending, though not breaking. Eli tugged her sleeve, glancing up at the stranger with curiosity. Marissa smoothed her son's hair, her voice quiet. "It's not easy for me to accept this." "I know," Nate said gently, "and that's why it matters more. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't giving, It's receiving. For a brief second, silence stretched between them. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that carried understanding. Marissa realized he wasn't trying to rescue her, wasn't trying to make her feel small. He was simply offering what he wished someone had offered his mother years ago. Her defenses wavered. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And for Nate, that was enough. While the grown-ups exchanged words heavy with pride and memory, Eli hugged his cereal box to his chest and studied Nate with a curious squint. To a child, adults were often mysteries, and this one in particular had just done something he couldn't quite process. Finally, unable to hold back, Eli asked in a voice louder than Marissa expected, "Are you rich?" The question landed like a pebble tossed into a still pond. The cashier paused mid-scan. A man in line chuckled under his breath, and Marissa's face flushed crimson. "Eli," she hissed, mortified, "that's not polite." But Nate didn't look offended. Instead, he crouched slightly so his eyes were level with Eli's. "Rich?" he repeated, pretending to think hard about it. "Well, I have a little money, yes. But do you want to know a secret?" Eli's eyes grew wide. "What?" "Money isn't the same thing as being rich," Nate whispered, his tone conspiratorial, like he was letting Eli in on something important. "Some people have a lot of money but feel very empty inside. And some people don't have much money at all but are the richest people in the world. Because of love." Eli tilted his head, processing this. "So, are you empty rich or love rich?" he asked, frowning in concentration. The cashier let out a laugh she tried to stifle, and Marissa felt her embarrassment melting into something else, something warmer. Nate chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's a very good question. I think I'm still learning the answer." Eli grinned, clearly satisfied that he had asked something important. "Well, Mommy makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches. That makes me rich." Marissa's eyes stung at her son's simple declaration. She looked away quickly, pretending to check the bags, but inside, the wall she had built so carefully around her heart began to crack just a little. The tension that had filled the air moments earlier loosened. For the first time, Marissa felt the corners of her lips lift, a small, reluctant smile breaking through. Nate noticed, and the sight of it stirred something inside him. A quiet reminder that connection often begins in laughter. The bags were filled, the receipt handed over, and the line behind them began to move again. Yet for Marissa, time felt oddly slowed, as if something had shifted in the space between herself and this stranger. Eli was still chattering about grilled cheese sandwiches, holding on to Nate's earlier words with childlike delight. "If grilled cheese makes you love rich," he declared, "then Mommy is the richest person in the world." Marissa shook her head, embarrassed but laughing now despite herself. "Eli, that's enough," she whispered, though her voice carried a softness it hadn't before. Nate smiled, not the polished, practiced smile of a man used to boardrooms and cameras, but a genuine one, easy and unguarded. It lingered for a second longer than necessary, and when Marissa's eyes met his, something passed between them, not a spark that burned bright and fast, but a quiet recognition, a sense that they had both stumbled into a moment neither expected, yet neither wanted to dismiss. They stepped toward the exit together, Eli skipping a little ahead, cereal box still in hand like a prize. The automatic doors slid open, letting in the cool night air. Marissa adjusted the strap of one grocery bag and glanced sideways at Nate. "You really didn't have to do this." "I know," he replied simply. His voice carried no pride, no demand for gratitude, just sincerity. Her lips parted as though to respond, but she found herself unable to. For once, words felt unnecessary. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like an agreement that something meaningful had happened, even if neither of them could name it yet. A soft laugh escaped her, unexpected and almost shy. Nate's eyes flicked toward her, catching the sound, and for a brief moment, His own laughter joined hers. The weight of the grocery store faded behind them, replaced by a fragile but undeniable sense of connection. Neither of them knew where this would lead. But in that walk from the checkout counter to the sliding doors, a door inside both of them had quietly opened. The weekend arrived with skies clear and bright, a rare gift after a long week. Marissa had promised Eli they'd spend Saturday morning at the park, and though her body longed for rest after late shifts, she kept her word. Eli ran ahead toward the playground, his laughter carrying across the open space. Marissa followed more slowly, her arms folded against the breeze when she noticed someone waiting near the benches. Nate. He stood casually, hands in his pockets, dressed simply enough that most wouldn't have guessed his status. When Eli spotted him, the boy's face lit up. "Mr. Nate," he shouted, rushing forward without hesitation. Nate knelt to meet him, his smile genuine. "Hey, champ, you ready to show me your favorite swings?" Marissa caught up, slightly out of breath, her brows lifting. "You didn't have to come," she said, though her tone lacked the edge she might have intended. "I wanted to," Nate replied easily. "If that's all right with you." She hesitated, then nodded. Eli clearly doesn't mind. They walked together toward the swings, Eli already climbing on one with the uncontainable energy only children seem to have. Nate gave the chains a push, and Eli squealed with delight as he swung higher. Marissa watched, her lips curving into an involuntary smile. For the next hour, Nate didn't act like a man separated by wealth. He became part of their morning, chasing Eli through the grass, helping him climb the jungle gym, even pretending to lose a race so the boy could triumph. The sound of Eli's laughter was brighter than any deal Nate had ever closed, and Marissa noticed the way he seemed to take it in like a man starving for something money couldn't buy. At one point, when Eli darted off to play with other kids, Marissa and Nate sat side by side on a bench. A comfortable quiet settled between them. She glanced at him, studying the ease with which he interacted with her son, and said softly, "You're good with him." Nate shrugged, almost shy. "Maybe because I never got to be that carefree when I was his age. Watching him, it feels like a second chance at something I missed." The words caught her off guard. She hadn't expected honesty, not from a man who seemed built of steel and success, but the look in his eyes was unguarded, sincere. For a brief moment she forgot the gulf between their lives. Eli came running back, grabbing Nate's hand as though it belonged there. Marissa watched the scene quietly, her heart conflicted but warming in ways she didn't want to admit. The following week, Eli's school hosted its annual fundraiser. It was a modest event, folding tables lined with baked goods, handmade crafts, and a raffle with donated prizes. For Marissa, it was another reminder of how much she wanted to give Eli, but how limited her means were. She had stayed up late baking 2 trays of cookies for the bake sale. They weren't perfect, some were uneven, others a little too crisp around the edges. But Eli had helped stir the batter, and his proud grin when they placed the trays on the table made every ounce of effort worthwhile. Nate arrived quietly, blending into the crowd without drawing attention. He wore a simple jacket, his hair slightly tousled, and for once, no one recognized him as the man whose name appeared in business journals. He had told Marissa earlier in the week that he'd like to attend, but she hadn't taken him seriously. When she spotted him across the gymnasium, her heart skipped in surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked when he approached, her voice low, as if trying to keep his presence from becoming too obvious. "I came to support Eli," Nate said with a shrug, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Besides, I haven't been to a school fundraiser in decades." She wanted to protest, but stopped when she saw Eli's face light up at the sight of Nate. The boy waved him over eagerly, pulling him toward the raffle tickets. Throughout the event, Nate moved with quiet intention. When he bought cookies, he chose Marissa's tray, slipping extra bills into the donation jar without making a scene. When he purchased raffle tickets, he didn't hoard them for himself. Instead, he handed them out to kids who hadn't been able to afford any, each child smiling at the unexpected kindness. Later, when the principal announced that the school had exceeded its fundraising goal, the crowd erupted in applause. Marissa clapped too, but her eyes drifted toward Nate. She knew without needing to ask that his generosity had played a role, yet he never drew attention to it. He simply stood among the other parents, cheering with the same enthusiasm, as though he were just another member of the community. Afterward, as they stepped outside, Marissa turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't have to do that." Nate looked at her, his expression steady. "I wanted to. And not for me, for Eli, for the school, for the kids who'll benefit from it." She pressed her lips together, conflicted. Gratitude swelled in her chest, but so did the old tug of pride. He wasn't showing off, though. That much she knew. His actions weren't about pity, they were about respect. He gave quietly, leaving dignity untouched. And that, more than the money itself, unsettled her. Despite Nate's quiet generosity, Marissa refused to let herself grow comfortable with the idea of leaning on him. She respected his kindness, but she feared what it would mean if she allowed him to solve too many of her problems. Her life had been built on struggle, and though she was tired of it, she also knew that hard work was the only thing keeping her dignity intact. On Monday morning, she was up before dawn again. She tied her apron at the cafe, her smile practiced but genuine enough for the regulars who stopped in for coffee before work. Her feet ached from long shifts, but she kept moving, balancing trays, wiping counters, remembering each customer's order without writing it down. That evening, she changed clothes in the back room before heading to her second job at the small accounting office. The fluorescent lights there hummed faintly, the air smelling of paper and ink. She filed receipts, answered phones, double-checked figures and ledgers. It wasn't glamorous, but she did it with precision because every hour meant another small step toward stability. Nate noticed her exhaustion when they crossed paths later that week. He had offered to drive her and Eli home after the fundraiser, but she had declined, insisting they'd take the bus. When he saw her later, shoulders slumped with fatigue, he couldn't hide his concern. "You don't always have to push yourself this hard," he said gently. Marissa shook her head. "Yes, I do. This is my life, Nate. Eli depends on me, and I refuse to let anyone think I can't stand on my own." Her words weren't sharp, but they carried steel. Nate respected that. He didn't argue, didn't try to tell her she was wrong. He only said, "I admire that about you." Still, she caught the look in his eyes, the one that said he wished he could take some of the weight off her shoulders. She appreciated it, but she knew she couldn't allow herself to grow dependent. She had survived this long by being unshakable, even when her heart longed for rest. That night, after putting Eli to bed, she opened her small notebook where she tracked every expense. Her pen scratched across the page as she stretched the numbers, trimming here, adjusting there, making the impossible work. She sighed deeply, closing the book when fatigue blurred the ink. What she didn't know was that Nate, from a respectful distance, was also planning ways to support her without making her feel diminished. His wealth could change her circumstances overnight, but he understood that to her, dignity mattered more than comfort, and so he resolved to walk carefully, helping when he could, but never in ways that stripped her of the independence she fought so fiercely to protect. It was a Thursday evening when Marissa finally gave in to a small idea she'd been turning over in her mind all week. Nate had been present in their lives often enough now, picking Eli up from the park, attending the fundraiser, even walking them to the bus stop, that she felt it was time to offer something back. She couldn't match his generosity in money, but she could offer something personal, so she invited him to dinner. Her kitchen was tiny, the table barely large enough for three, but she cleaned every corner with care. She laid out Eli's favorite plates, the ones with faded cartoon rockets, and set the silverware neatly, though a few pieces didn't match. The aroma of grilled chicken and roasted vegetables filled the air. a meal she had stretched carefully from what she could afford. When Nate arrived, he paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. His smile softened, and for the first time since Marissa had met him, she saw something almost vulnerable in his expression. "This smells incredible," he said warmly. "It's nothing fancy," Marissa replied quickly, brushing off the compliment as she stirred the pot. But when they sat down together, Eli grinning between them, Nate took his first bite and let out a quiet chuckle. "You know," he said, "nobody has cooked for me in years. Not since my mother." Marissa looked up, surprised. "What do you mean? You must have chefs." He shook his head. "Yes, I have staff. They prepare meals, but that's different. What I mean is, nobody cooks for me, for Nathaniel. Not the CEO, not the man with money, just me." The honesty in his tone silenced her. She realized that for all his wealth, his life had been missing something simple yet profound, the kind of care that came not from obligation but from thoughtfulness. Eli wrinkled his nose. "Well, Mommy makes the best food, better than any chef." Marissa laughed softly, but inside her heart tightened. Nate's confession lingered in her thoughts, reshaping how she saw him. He wasn't just the man who stepped in at the grocery store. He was someone who carried his own emptiness, who longed for ordinary moments she often took for granted. They ate together, their conversation weaving between light laughter and thoughtful silences. It wasn't a grand feast, but it was real, and for Nate, it was something far more valuable than any banquet he'd ever attended. Halfway through the meal, Marissa glanced at Nate, her voice tentative. "Why do you keep doing this, helping us?" Nate set down his fork, his expression calm. "Because dignity matters. I'm not here to take over your life, Marissa. I just want to walk beside you. And if I can make things a little easier without changing who you are, then that's all I need." Her chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't only with pride or fear. It was something softer, something she wasn't ready to name yet. And to you watching this story unfold, let me pause for a moment. If you believe kindness can change a life, if you believe dignity is worth protecting even in the hardest times, go ahead and tap the subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that hope is real. These stories spread further when you do, and together we can keep telling them. Helping someone isn't about rescuing them, it's about respecting them. Nate understood that. Marissa's independence was her strength, and he never sought to take that from her. Instead, he chose the harder path, offering support without overshadowing her. And in that balance, something deeper began to grow, a connection built not on wealth, but on mutual respect. It was late one evening when Marissa and Nate found themselves walking slowly through the quiet streets near her apartment. Eli had fallen asleep earlier, and a neighbor had offered to keep an ear out while Marissa stepped out for a short stroll. She rarely accepted help, but tonight she had. She needed air, and Nate had been there to accompany her. The night was calm, the kind of stillness that made words feel heavier, more honest. For a while, they walked in silence until Nate finally said, "Do you ever feel like the world only sees a single version of you?" Marissa glanced at him, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" He shrugged lightly. "For me, it's the money. People don't look at me and see Nathaniel, the person. They see a balance sheet, a headline, a potential connection they can use. Sometimes I wonder if anyone sees me at all." She let his words settle, hearing not arrogance but weariness. "I know what that feels like. For me, it's the opposite. People look at me and only see a struggling mother. They don't see the work I put in, the dreams I had before life changed. They don't see me either." Nate stopped walking for a moment, studying her face under the glow of the streetlights. "So we're both invisible, in different ways." Marissa's lips curved faintly, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe that's why we understand each other." The conversation shifted, flowing into more vulnerable places. She spoke of the fear that often kept her awake, the thought of failing Eli, of not being enough for him. Nate admitted his own fear, that he could live his whole life surrounded by wealth and yet never know the warmth of a real connection. Their steps carried them slowly forward, but the words drew them closer than physical distance ever could. By the time they returned to her building, there was no need for a long goodbye. The shared truths lingered between them, unspoken but undeniable. The days that followed carried a quiet shift neither Marissa nor Nate spoke of directly, yet both felt. It wasn't loud or sudden, it was in the details, the kind of subtle movements that spoke more than words. One evening, Marissa sat on her worn couch, sorting through a small pile of mail. Nate had stopped by after work, his tie loosened, his jacket draped casually over the chair. Eli was on the floor building towers with his blocks, his laughter echoing as they collapsed and were rebuilt. There wasn't a grand declaration or fiery moment. Instead, there was a pause, Nate leaning down to help Eli stack the blocks higher, Marissa watching from the couch with a soft smile. When their eyes met across the room, something passed between them, unspoken recognition, a warmth that made her breath hitch for the briefest second. Later, when Eli finally drifted off to sleep, Nate lingered a little longer. Marissa walked him to the door, her hand brushing his arm as she reached for the knob. Neither pulled away immediately. Their eyes held, silence filling the space in a way that wasn't heavy but comforting. Nate cleared his throat softly. "You know, I don't mind the quiet with you. Most people fill every gap with noise. But with you, silence feels right." Her lips parted, then closed again, words unnecessary. Instead, she let the corner of her mouth curve in the faintest smile. She didn't step back right away. Neither did he. The closeness wasn't about touch, but about presence, knowing they didn't have to force anything because something real was already there. Another day, in the park again, Eli ran ahead chasing pigeons while Marissa and Nate walked behind. A gust of wind caught her hair, and without thinking, Nate reached gently to tuck a strand behind her ear. His fingers lingered for only a moment, but it was enough to make her heart stumble in her chest. She said nothing, but her cheeks warmed, and when she glanced up at him, she found him watching her, not as a man assessing, but as someone quietly memorizing. These gestures, these silences, were where their bond deepened most. No rush, no forced passion, only small moments that whispered of something growing stronger, something neither of them could deny much longer. The night of Eli's school play arrived with all the excitement of a holiday. Marissa had worked extra shifts to afford the small costume fee, stitching last-minute adjustments by hand so the outfit fit just right. Eli, dressed as a brave explorer in a paper hat and vest, could barely contain his excitement. The auditorium was crowded with parents clutching phones and cameras, the air buzzing with chatter. Marissa squeezed into a seat near the middle, saving the spot beside her, though she wasn't sure Nate would come. He had mentioned a late meeting, and she tried not to feel disappointed at the thought he might not make it. But just as the lights dimmed, she felt a presence slide into the empty chair. She turned, startled, and found Nate beside her, slightly breathless, tie loosened, his hair mussed from rushing. "Wouldn't miss this for anything," he whispered. Relief washed through her so strongly she had to blink quickly to hide the sudden shine in her eyes. The curtain rose and the children shuffled onto the stage. Eli scanned the audience, his eyes searching, until they landed on Marissa, and then on Nate. His grin stretched wide, and he waved with both hands before remembering he was supposed to stand still. The audience chuckled softly at the small break in character. Marissa's chest swelled with pride, but when she glanced sideways, she caught Nate watching Eli with the kind of expression that made her throat tighten. It wasn't just amusement. It was something deeper, almost fatherly, though he never overstepped. His hands clasped in front of him, shoulders leaning slightly forward, as if willing Eli to succeed. During the play, Eli stumbled over a line. For a heartbeat, he froze. Marissa's fingers tightened on the edge of her seat, ready to silently mouth the words to guide him. But before she could, Nate leaned slightly forward, his expression calm and encouraging, and Eli spotted him. That one look seemed to steady the boy. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and spoke his line with clarity. The audience applauded, and Eli's grin returned full force. By the end of the play, Eli was glowing, running into Marissa's arms the moment the curtain fell. "Did you see me? Did you hear my lines?" he asked, his voice bubbling over. "We saw everything," Marissa said, hugging him tightly. Nate ruffled Eli's hair. "You were the best explorer I've ever seen." Eli's giggle echoed through the crowded hallway, his small hand reaching instinctively for Nate's. Marissa noticed, but said nothing. Instead, she let herself savor the moment, her son happy, her heart strangely lighter, and Nate beside them, fitting into the picture in ways she hadn't expected. It was a Saturday afternoon, when the weather turned without warning. The clouds thickened quickly, and before long, heavy rain poured down across the city. Marissa and Eli had been out running errands when Nate offered them a ride. But instead of hurrying straight home, the three of them stopped at a small park gazebo, waiting for the storm to ease. The sound of raindrops drumming on the wooden roof filled the space, creating a rhythm that made conversation feel more intimate. Eli, delighted by the sudden change, stretched out his hands to catch droplets along the edge of the shelter. His laughter filled the damp air as he danced in little circles before running back to the safety of the gazebo. Marissa shook her head, smiling despite herself. Her hair clung slightly to her face, damp from their sprint across the field. Nate, standing nearby, reached into his pocket and handed her a handkerchief. The gesture was simple, but the way his hand brushed hers made her pulse quicken. For a moment, silence lingered, only the rain speaking. Then Nate asked, "What did you dream of before all this? Before life pulled you in other directions?" Marissa hesitated. No one had asked her that in years. She wrapped the handkerchief in her hands, staring out at the sheets of rain. "I wanted to teach. I loved literature, stories, the way words could change how people think. But then, life shifted. Bills didn't wait for dreams. Eli became my world, and I never regretted that. Still, sometimes I wonder what could have been." Nate listened, truly listened, his gaze steady on her face. "You still can," he said softly. "Dreams don't have to disappear. They can wait until the right time." His words settled in her chest, stirring something she had buried beneath responsibilities. Then she asked quietly, "And you? What did you want before the businesses, before the success?" Nate leaned back against the wooden post, watching the rain blur the horizon. "I wanted connection, a family. People who cared about me, not what I could provide. I chased success thinking it would bring that, but it only made the distance greater." Their eyes met, and for a long moment, the storm outside felt like a mirror of the one inside them, restless, full of unsaid things. Eli broke the heaviness with a cheerful exclamation, holding up a leaf he had caught in the rain. They both laughed, the tension easing, but the bond between them deepened further in that shared honesty. When the rain finally slowed, they walked back toward Nate's car. Marissa's hand brushed his once, and this time neither pulled away quickly. They walked side by side, the storm behind them, something new forming quietly ahead. Late one night, long after Eli had drifted to sleep, Marissa sat at the kitchen table with her worn notebook open. A single lamp cast a small circle of light, illuminating the page as her pen hovered over the lines. She had used this notebook for years, not just for budgeting, but as a place to pour her thoughts when they grew too heavy to hold. Her handwriting began slowly, shaky at first. "Why is he here? Why does a man like Nathaniel keep showing up? Part of me wants to believe it's real, that he cares, but another part whispers he's only being kind, maybe out of pity. Could I mistake gratitude for love?" She paused, staring at the words until they blurred. A tear slipped down her cheek, landing on the page, smudging the ink. She quickly wiped it away, angry at herself for being so vulnerable even in private. Her pen scratched again. What happens when he realizes I can't give him the life he's used to? I don't belong in his world. I shop clearance aisles, count coins, pray bills don't get shut off. He closes deals in glass towers, eats in places I can't pronounce. How could this ever last? She closed the notebook abruptly, pressing her palm against the cover as if to silence her own thoughts. Her chest tightened with a familiar fear, not of losing him but of never having truly deserved him in the first place. In the next room she could hear Eli's soft breathing. She rose, tiptoed to his door, and looked in. His small figure curled beneath the blanket reminded her why she fought so hard. She brushed a kiss against his forehead and whispered, "You're my reason, always." But as she closed his door again, another whisper crept into her mind, one she couldn't silence. What if this new connection only ended in heartbreak, leaving both her and Eli with scars they didn't need? The question clung to her as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. Her heart warred between hope and doubt, and though she longed to trust, fear had already begun to spread its roots. The boardroom was all clean lines and glass, the kind of place where voices stayed measured even when stakes were high. Nate sat at the head of the table as his leadership team wrapped up a quarterly review. Numbers were strong, projections even stronger. By every metric that mattered to his company, the day was a win. But as laptops closed and chairs slid back, the conversation shifted, subtle at first, then more pointed. "Drinks at Halcyon?" asked Trevor, the CFO, checking his watch. "We should toast the quarter." Nate shook his head. "I've got plans. Again?" Trevor chuckled. "You've had plans a lot lately." Across the table, Lila, the head of communications, exchanged a look with Trevor. Her voice was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "We've been fielding a few questions, Nate. From the press, from partners. Questions about what?" he asked, though he already had a guess. "About who you've been seen with," Trevor said. "A woman. And her kid." Nate's jaw tensed. "Her name is Marissa, and the boy is her son, Eli." Lila folded her arms. "We don't care about your personal life, not exactly, but we do care when it intersects with brand perception." "Optics matter." "Optics?" Nate repeated softly. Trevor leaned forward. "Look, no one's telling you what to do, but some of our partners operate in a certain social sphere. They expect stability, familiarity. They want to know their money is overseen by someone who won't surprise them." Nate let the words sit. "You think I'm unstable because I'm spending time with a single mom?" "That's not what we said," Lila replied, maintaining her even tone. "But there's a narrative forming. Self-made billionaire dating out of his social circle. It raises questions about motives, about longevity. Some outlets will spin it however they want." Nate clasped his hands. "What they call spin is a life, a real one. She and her son are decent people." Trevor gave a thin smile. "I'm sure they are, but investors don't grade on decency. They grade on predictability." "Careful," Nate said quietly. Trevor lifted his hands. "I'm only thinking about the firm. We've worked too hard to risk anything for a relationship that might not—" He stopped short, choosing a more neutral word. "That's new." Lila's voice softened a fraction. "Nathaniel, I've known you a long time. You've built an image that commands respect. You've also worked very hard to keep your private world private. This is different. People will look for angles. They'll ask, why her? Because she's honest," Nate said. "Because she's strong. Because when she looks at me, she sees a person, not a headline." Silence. Finally, Lila slid her tablet into her bag. "If you're serious about her, then we adapt. But you need to be ready for scrutiny. Questions about her past, her job, her finances. The world doesn't play fair." Trevor rose from his chair. "If this becomes a distraction, the board will bring it up." He hesitated, then added, formally. Nate stood as well, his voice calm but firm. "Then tell the board the distraction improved my judgment. Because lately, I'm seeing more clearly than I have in years. They filed out, leaving Nate alone with the view. The city stretched outward, bright and relentless. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the old ache return, the one that came every time he was reminded that money could buy access to any room, yet never guarantee understanding once he got there. He checked his phone. A text from Marissa blinked on the screen. "Eli read me a whole page tonight. He's so proud." Nate smiled despite the heaviness. Whatever the board thought, that message mattered more. Still, the warning hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. The pressure wasn't going away, and he knew it would soon find its way to Marissa too. The tension surfaced quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. It wasn't one big fight. It was the accumulation of small silences, words left unsaid, glances that lingered a little too long before drifting away. It began one evening when Nate arrived later than usual. Marissa had made dinner, simple pasta with vegetables, but by the time he walked through the door, she was already clearing the table. Eli had eaten and was now sprawled on the couch with a book. "You're late," Marissa said softly, not accusing, just stating a fact. "Meeting ran long," Nate replied, loosening his tie. His voice was flat, weary. She nodded, her back turned as she rinsed the plates. "Of course." The unspoken weight hung between them. Nate wanted to explain, to tell her about the comments from his colleagues, about the pressure mounting, but he didn't. He told himself he was protecting her from needless worry. Instead, he let the silence grow. Over the next few days, the space widened. Marissa noticed when his gaze seemed distant, when his phone buzzed with messages he didn't share. She wondered if her fears, the ones she had scrawled into her notebook, were already coming true. One evening after walking Eli home from school, she decided to ask directly. Nate was sitting at her kitchen table, scrolling through emails, his expression tight. "Tell me something honestly," she said, standing across from him. He looked up, surprised. "Of course." Her hands twisted in front of her. "Am I just temporary? A distraction until someone from your world comes along? Someone who actually belongs there?" The question cut sharper than she intended, but once it was out, she couldn't pull it back. Nate's face stiffened. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what to think," she admitted, her voice breaking. "You disappear into meetings, people whisper about you, and I'm just here, trying to hold my life together. I don't know where I fit in yours." For a moment, his chest rose as if he would speak, but then he pressed his lips together. He didn't want to lash out, didn't want to say something he'd regret. But his silence spoke louder than words. Marissa swallowed hard, hurt flashing across her features. "That's what I thought," she whispered, turning away. The air between them thickened with everything unsaid. Nate wanted to cross the space, to take her hand, to reassure her. But the voices of his colleagues echoed in his mind. Why her? Think about optics. He hesitated, and that hesitation widened the distance. When he finally did stand, Marissa had already retreated to Eli's room, her voice faint as she read him a bedtime story. Nate lingered in the doorway of the kitchen, listening to her steady tone. He longed to interrupt, to bridge the chasm between them, but instead, he quietly let himself out, the click of the door sounding like finality. That night, both of them lay awake in separate rooms, hearts heavy with questions neither could yet answer. In the days that followed, both Marissa and Nate carried the weight of their silence. They still saw one another, but something had shifted, their words careful, their smiles thinner, their time together edged with caution. Marissa found herself journaling again, trying to make sense of the ache in her chest. Maybe love isn't enough. Maybe the gap between our worlds is too wide. Maybe I was foolish to believe he could truly choose me. Her pen pressed so hard against the page that the paper nearly tore. At the same time, Nate faced growing whispers within his circle. At a charity gala where glittering dresses and polished suits filled the hall, a partner leaned in with a smirk. "Still spending time with the waitress?" "Bold choice." Nate's jaw tightened. "Her name is Marissa." "Relax," the man said, sipping his drink. "We're just surprised you could have anyone." Why tie yourself down with complications? Nate forced a smile he didn't feel, but inside the words cut deeper than he expected. Not because he doubted Marissa, but because he feared what such judgment might do to her, how it might wound her pride if she ever heard it. Meanwhile, Marissa sensed the distance growing. One evening, when Nate failed to return a call, she sat on the edge of her bed staring at the phone. She wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of wondering if she was good enough, tired of second-guessing every glance and every silence. The truth was simple, both of them cared deeply, but fear had become their uninvited guest. Fear of not being enough, fear of being judged, fear of choosing wrong and paying the price in broken hearts. Yet even in that tension, something quietly endured. When Nate finally stopped by after several days apart, Eli ran into his arms without hesitation. Children had no use for pride or optics. They only knew who made them feel safe. Marissa watched, her heart twisting. If Eli trusted him so easily, why couldn't she? Nate met her gaze over Eli's shoulder. For a moment, the noise of outside voices, the pressure of expectations, all seemed to fade. In that look was a silent plea. Don't let the world decide this for us. The moral was clear, though neither said it aloud. Love is not proven in easy moments. It is tested in doubt, in pride, in the sharp edges of judgment from those who do not understand. The question was not whether Marissa and Nate cared for one another. It was whether they would be brave enough to choose each other in spite of everything pressing against them. The breaking point arrived not in private, but in public. A networking gala filled with business leaders and press buzzed inside the ballroom of a downtown hotel. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across tables dressed in linen, the air heavy with the clink of glasses and rehearsed laughter. Nate had attended hundreds of such events in his life, but tonight felt different. Tonight, he wasn't just a CEO shaking hands. He was a man standing on a threshold. Marissa had hesitated to come, but Nate had asked her gently, almost pleading. Not as my guest, he had said, but as the person I want beside me. Against her instinct to avoid scrutiny, she agreed. She wore a simple navy dress she'd found on clearance, her hair pinned back neatly. She felt out of place the moment they entered, but Nate kept her hand in his, steady and firm. It didn't take long for whispers to start, some curious, some cutting. She caught fragments as they passed. She's pretty, but plain. Where's she from? Single mother, I heard. Each word chipped at her composure, but she lifted her chin, refusing to let them see her falter. When they paused near a group of investors, Trevor, the CFO who had hinted before, spoke with a too-polished smile. Nathaniel, you've been keeping secrets, and here she is. He extended a hand toward Marissa, his tone sharp under the surface. What's it like, stepping into this world? The words stung, dressed as politeness but weighted with dismissal. Marissa opened her mouth, unsure whether to respond, when Nate's voice cut through, calm but unwavering. It's exactly what it looks like, he said. A woman of strength, raising a remarkable boy, standing here because I asked her to be by my side. And before anyone wonders, no, this isn't a story about charity. This is about respect, about love. The group stilled. Glasses paused midair. Trevor forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. We didn't mean... Yes, you did, Nate interrupted smoothly, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. And that's fine. Think what you want. But understand this. She is not less because her life looks different than ours. If anything, she's more. Because she's built everything from nothing, while most of us were handed half our start. Marissa's chest tightened, her breath catching at his words. The ballroom, once a place she had dreaded, now seemed smaller, less intimidating, because Nate had claimed his ground without flinching. The whispers didn't stop entirely, but their tone shifted. Some eyes softened, others turned away, but Nate's hand never left hers. In that moment she understood he wasn't ashamed. Not of her, not of Eli, not of the life she had carved out against the odds. And for the first time she allowed herself to believe she wasn't standing in his shadow. She was standing beside him, seen and defended without apology. That night, long after the gala ended, Marissa sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the small mirror across the room. The dress she had worn hung on the chair, simple and unremarkable by the standards of the glittering ballroom, yet it now held a meaning she hadn't expected. She replayed Nate's words in her mind. She is not less. The strength with which he spoke them, the certainty in his voice, had cut through years of quiet shame she didn't even realize she still carried. For so long she had measured herself against impossible standards. She had convinced herself that her value was tied to how much she could provide for Eli, how little she needed from anyone else, how well she could endure without faltering. She had mistaken independence for worth. But Nate's defense showed her something different. Dignity didn't mean refusing help. It meant being seen and loved for who she was without conditions. The next day, when Nate stopped by to take Eli to the park, Marissa pulled him aside before they left. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I need to say something," she began. "For weeks now, I've been caught between gratitude and fear, grateful for you, afraid of what it means, afraid that if I let myself believe in this, I'll lose it, and it'll hurt Eli most of all." Nate's expression softened, but he stayed silent, giving her space to continue. "I've realized something," she went on. "Love isn't about proving I can do everything alone. It's about choosing someone who stands beside me, not above me. And I think I've been pushing you away because I was too afraid to trust that it could be real." Nate reached for her hands, his touch warm and steady. "Marissa, I don't want to replace your strength. I want to share it. I want to build something with you, not in spite of who you are, but because of it." Her eyes burned, tears threatening, but for once she didn't fight them. She let them fall, small streaks down her cheeks, and with them, the heavy weight of fear she had carried for too long. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. For the first time, the walls she had built around her heart cracked wide enough to let someone fully in. It wasn't surrender, it was acceptance. Acceptance that love didn't make her weaker. It made her stronger, because she no longer had to carry everything alone. The shift came gradually, though it felt natural, as if it had been waiting to happen all along. Nate began spending more time with Eli, not just in grand gestures but in everyday moments, the kind of moments that shape a child's memory of home. On Saturday mornings, they built Lego castles together on the living room floor. Nate didn't check his phone or glance at his watch. He sat cross-legged beside Eli, listening intently as the boy explained why the tallest tower had to be red, not blue. At the park, Nate didn't stand off to the side like many parents. He climbed the jungle gym, slid down the slides, even joined in soccer matches with Eli and the neighborhood kids. Other parents watched, surprised to see the usually composed man sprinting across the grass with his tie loosened, laughing breathlessly when Eli scored a goal against him. But the clearest moment came one evening when Eli bounded into the kitchen, holding a school paper. "Look, Mommy, I got a star for reading." Marissa smiled, ruffling his hair. "That's wonderful, Eli." Eli turned to Nate, eyes wide. "Did you see? My teacher said I'm one of the best readers now." Nate crouched down to Eli's height, holding the paper carefully as though it were a priceless document. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice steady but tender. "You worked hard, and you earned this." Eli threw his arms around Nate's neck without hesitation. "Thanks, Mr. Nate." Marissa watched the embrace, her throat tightening. She had seen Eli hug family before, but this was different. This was her son choosing, in his own innocent way, to let someone new into their circle. That night, after Eli was asleep, Marissa and Nate sat on the couch. She glanced at him, her voice quiet. "He looks up to you." Nate nodded, his expression serious. "I'd never try to replace his father, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be someone he can always count on." Her heart swelled. the last of her resistance crumbling. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. He already does, Nate. And so do I. In that moment, the three of them, Marissa, Eli, and Nate, were no longer fragments of separate lives. They were becoming something whole, something new, a family formed not by chance, but by choice. It was a late afternoon in spring, the kind where the air felt soft and the sky held a promise of warmth after a long winter. Marissa, Nate, and Eli strolled through the park, their steps unhurried. Eli ran ahead, chasing a kite someone else had let loose, his laughter rising above the hum of the city. Marissa and Nate walked side by side, their shoulders brushing occasionally. Neither spoke at first, there was no need. The silence between them now wasn't heavy, it was full, rich with everything they had endured to reach this moment. As they paused by a bench, Marissa turned toward him, her eyes reflecting both relief and wonder. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "that all of this started with something as ordinary as a grocery store?" Nate chuckled, the sound low and warm. "I think about it every day. That if I'd looked away, if I'd kept walking, I might have missed the most important part of my life." Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with gratitude. She realized that love had crept into her life not as a rescue, not as a lightning strike, but as a steady hand that had refused to let her carry the weight alone. Eli's laughter carried back to them, and Nate's gaze followed the boy. Then he turned back to Marissa, his expression tender. He reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly. "You're all I've ever needed," he whispered. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but they weren't from doubt, they were from release, from the joy of finally allowing herself to believe. She leaned into him, her forehead against his chest, his arms circling her with a warmth that felt like home. Eli came bounding back, grabbing both their hands without hesitation. "Come on, let's go see the ducks," he shouted, tugging them forward. They laughed, letting the boy lead the way, their hands linked firmly as if they had always belonged together. Wealth can purchase comfort, but it cannot buy love. Status can open doors, but it cannot fill an empty heart. What Marissa and Nate discovered was that true connection is born not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments of sacrifice, kindness, and trust. Love tested by fear, pride, and judgment is love proven. And when two people choose each other in spite of the world's noise, they create something stronger than circumstance. The story of Marissa, Eli, and Nate did not end at the park that spring afternoon. In truth, it was only the beginning. But what made that beginning so profound was not the wealth Nate carried, nor the strength Marissa had clung to for years. It was the meeting of two lives that, by all logic, should have remained apart, yet somehow fit together as if they had been waiting for one another all along. When we look back at their journey, what stands out is not a single moment, but the pattern of many. The quiet courage of Marissa removing items from her grocery cart, determined to stretch every coin for her child. The unguarded kindness of Nate stepping forward with 6 words that changed everything. Keep everything. Your bills are mine now. The laughter of Eli, bridging 2 worlds with innocence, showing both adults that love doesn't require conditions. The struggles, private doubts, public judgment, the fear of being too little or not enough, and finally the choice to love in spite of those fears, to stand together when others expected them to fold. It would be easy to call this a fairy tale, a neat story of rich meets poor. But that misses the truth. The real lesson was never about money, it was about perspective. Marissa's strength was not in never needing anyone, but in realizing she could accept help without losing herself. She showed that quiet sacrifices, late nights, endless shifts, and moments of doubt she never let Eli see were the marks of a hero. Not the kind we celebrate in headlines, but the kind who builds a child's world with love as the foundation. Nate's strength was not in his empire, but in the humility to see beyond it. He had lived surrounded by wealth, yet starving for connection. Through Marissa and Eli, he learned that love cannot be bought or scheduled, only given and received in moments of sincerity. His boldest act was not building companies. It was defending her dignity in a room full of people who would never understand. Together they revealed something deeper, that compassion is most powerful when no one is watching. That dignity is worth more than any dollar sign. That true family is chosen in the small, steady acts of loyalty and care. And maybe most importantly, that life has a way of surprising us in the most ordinary places. A grocery store, a school play, a rainy afternoon in the park. These are not the stages where we expect transformation, yet they are the ones that often hold it. So what can we take from their story? First, that our worth is never measured by what we lack. Marissa believed her struggles diminished her. In truth, they refined her, shaping her into someone resilient and kind. Second, that love is not weakened by vulnerability. Nate feared his wealth made him untouchable. Instead, his openness, his willingness to show loneliness and longing, was what made space for real intimacy. And finally, that fate often writes its boldest lines in the margins of our ordinary days. None of them expected their lives to intertwine. But because Nate chose compassion over indifference, and Marissa chose trust over fear, something extraordinary was born. For every viewer listening now, the invitation is simple. Look closely at your own ordinary moments. The stranger you pass, the kindness you choose to give, the vulnerability you allow yourself to share. Any of these could become the start of a story that changes everything. Because love in its truest form is not about perfection. It is about presence, about showing up when it's hardest, choosing each other when the world says it's easier to walk away. She thought she was just surviving another day at the grocery store. He thought he was only buying groceries. But in that ordinary place, two extraordinary lives became one story, a story of love, compassion, and hope